Winston Churchill, never give in. One goal only, victory. In October 1941, Great Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill spoke at Harrow, the school he had gone to as a boy. The nation was facing a dark time. World War II was being fought, and Germany had conquered most of Eastern Europe. Britain stood alone against the power of Germany. Despite the danger of his country, Churchill was undaunted. For him, there could be just one goal for Britain: victory, whatever the cost. No matter how desperate the situation, Churchill told his listeners never give in, never, never, never. Churchill lived by those words throughout his life. He had never gave in to the enemies of Great Britain, to his political opponents, or to his own personal challenges. Young Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, at a family estate near Oxford, England. He was born into an aristocratic family with a long history of government and military service. Winston's father, Rudolph Churchill, was a well-known figure in conservation politics. His mother, Jenny Jerome, was an American. As a boy, Winston showed his little promise to his grades at school were average at best. Rather than going to Oxford or Cambridge University, the best universities in England, he entered the Royal Military Academy of Sandhurst. He graduated in 1894 and became an officer in the cavalry. The young officer was sent to India, which was an important part of the Britain's colonial empire. While on duty there, he published a book about an Indian revolt against British rule in the Northwest Province. It was the first of many non-fiction books he would write. In 1899, after leaving the army, Churchill became a writer for the London Morning Post newspaper. He went to South Africa to report on the Boer War, a rebellion against British rule by descendants of Dutch settlers called Boers. Soon after he arrived, Boer soldiers ambushed an armored train carrying Churchill and more than 100 British troops. The attackers captured Churchill and several dozen British soldiers and put them in prison. Churchill refused to give in. On December 9, he slipped over the prison wall. He evaded capture for 9 days and fled to freedom. His daring escape made him a national hero. Churchill returned home in 1900, just 26 years of age. He had already published 4 non-fiction books about the British military: Soaring Energy, Deep Despair, Sharp Wit. Churchill could write very quickly when he was inspired. He was often able to work with great energy. Over his lifetime, he wrote 43 books in his 40s. Churchill developed another interest, art, and pursued it with equal energy. Over a period of 48 years, he made more than 500 paintings. However, Churchill's periods of creative energy were often followed by terrible depressions, which he called "my black dog." Churchill struggled with his black dog many times throughout his life. When the black dog was away, Churchill had a great sense of humor. He had a reputation for wit, and that wit could be biting. He called one of his political opponents, Clement utterly a modest man with much to be modest about. In service to the government, Churchill was ambitious in his political career. He wanted to work at the highest levels of government. Shortly after he returned after his return from South Africa in 1900, he was elected to Parliament and served for 5 years. In 1908, Churchill married a young aristocratic woman, Clementis Hosier, who will have 5 children together. They will have 5 children together. After serving on several important government posts, Churchill was chosen to head the Royal Navy in 1911. During World War I, he pushed for a military operation in Turkey. The effort ended in a major defeat for Great Britain at its allies, costing Churchill his position with the Navy. To repair his reputation, Churchill rejoined the army that led troops fighting the Germans in France. 1 year before the war's end, Churchill returned to the government and was put in charge of weapons production. As part of his work, he helped develop the first combat tanks. After the war, Churchill continued to serve on and off in Parliament, but one prime minister after another denied his high office. They didn't agree with Churchill's thinking about many important issues. Churchill had against giving in to people in India who wanted independence for the British Empire. He also argued unsuccessfully that Britain should expand its military in the 1930s. After Adolf Hitler and Nazi Party came to power in Germany, Churchill's fears about Nazi Germany were well founded. Hitler strengthened Germany's military and formed an alliance with Italy and Japan called Axis. Hitler made one demand after another for more territory in Europe. When Hitler threatened to invade Slovakia in 1938, Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany. Chamberlain angered a deal that gave Germany part of Slovakia's territory in exchange for peace. Once back in Britain, Chamberlain and his believed he had secured peace for our time. Churchill publicly opposed the deal. In a speech before Parliament, Churchill said in Chamberlain, "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You choose dishonor, and you will have war." 6 months later, Germany broke the agreement and seized the rest of Czechoslovakia. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, igniting World War II. The 5 months of the war were badly for Britain, leading Chamberlain to regain empire as Prime Minister. Britain's King George VI, realizing that the nation needed a stronger leader, named Churchill to replace him on May 10, 1940. Britain besieged. In his address to Parliament 3 days later, Churchill warned that the days ahead would be difficult. "I have nothing to offer," he said, "but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." Those serious words soon became a reality, beginning in July and continuing for nearly 4 months, a period known as the Battle of Britain. German planes boomed the airfields, factories, ports, and eventually London. Hitler wanted to invade England, but the Royal Air Force stood in his way. The German Navy could not invade across the English Channel unless the RAF was defeated. Later, day after day, RAF pilots battled German fighters and bombers in the skies over England. Although the RAF suffered terrible losses, the Germans were never able to destroy its ability to fight, and Hitler had to call off the invasion. Thanking the RAF fighter pilots on behalf of the nation, Churchill said that never before was so much owned by so many to so few. Over the years, Churchill formed a close relationship with U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and asked him for help. The United States sent Britain military supplies, including ships and tanks. It also began providing supplies for the Soviet Union, which was thrust into the war in June 1941 by a German invasion of Russia. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, bringing the United States into the war. Britain, the United States, and Soviet Union, and other opponents of the Axis joined forces as the Allies. Throughout the war, Churchill was an inspiration to his nation. He worked long hours in an underground command center, made speeches to rally the people, and visited areas of London damaged by bombs. He never backed down from his message that Britain would never give in to the Germans. Victory at last, but at great cost. In late 1942, the tide of the war began to turn. In November, the Allies pushed the German army out of North Africa. Meanwhile, the Soviet army fought the Germans in the east, and Allied bombers pounded German targets. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin urged Roosevelt and Churchill to launch an invasion from the west. Finally, they did so. On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, a huge Allied invasion force landed on the coast of France. In August, Allied forces freed France from Nazi control. On May 7, 1945, when Germany finally surrendered, speaking to a London crowd, Churchill said, "This is your victory. It is the victory of the cause of freedom in every land." Sadly, President Roosevelt was not around to enjoy the moment. He had died of a stroke the month before. 4 months later, Japan surrendered as well. World War II was finally over. Widespread rejoicing tempered by reflection of the terrible cost of the conflict. More than 40 million people around the world had died. Final years. The world was now at peace, but political events took an unexpected turn for Churchill. In 1945, in July, war-weary Britons rejected Churchill's Conservation Party and voted the Labour Party into power. No longer Prime Minister, Churchill fell into a depression. In 1947, Churchill was alarmed by another development, with Britain granted India its independence. Churchill had insisted that Britain never give in to India's desire to leave the British Empire, but that empire was now coming to an end. In 1953, while serving one last time as Prime Minister, Churchill was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was forced to resign from the government in 1955 because of ill health, but he continued writing. In 1958, he completed one of his most important pieces of writing, A History for the English-Speaking Peoples. In 1963, Churchill became the first person ever to be named an honorary citizen of the United States by an act of Congress. It was one of his final honors. He died on January 24, 1965, at the age of 90. Honoring Churchill, British Prime Minister Harold Wilson called him the greatest man any of us have known.